Hi all, I hope you all are doing well. This is our last formal lecture for our careers course. This is going to be focused on the interview process. Just to recap what we've been going throughout our course, first in the beginning of the semester we discussed the different areas of psychology and possible careers within each area and what your work environment would look like if you were to choose that particular area. We also talked about how psychology maps onto other areas of concentrations as well. We also went through the various degree options that you have in psychology through a bachelor's, master's, PhD, and PsyD. And then we had our resume assignment, which, by the way, you all did so well. Good job. So now you have a working resume. You've had to show me either a job or a grad program that you are interested in applying to. And we've also had our writing day for our cover letters. So that is the letter of application that you would use to apply to that job or that program. Now, the last bit in this semester is the interview process. So let's say you have your resume, you have that job or grad program in mind, you put your materials in, so you've applied to the job or the grad program, you submitted that resume and your cover letter, and now they tell you that they want to interview you. So that's what we'll focus on today. Now, as far as the interview, remember, the vast majority of the time, if they want to interview you, they've reviewed your CV or resume, and you are likely qualified. They're not going to waste their time with you if you're not qualified for the job. So remember that. You don't have to justify when you go in to interview why you're qualified necessarily for the job. They know that you're qualified for the job. They want to know more about you at this point. They want to know what those qualifications that you have will do for them if they were to hire you. So again, the whole point then, if you're qualified, why are you really there for an interview? What is an interview really going to look like? If on paper you have what they say they want, why do they actually want to meet you? Let's look at it first from the perspective of the interviewer. Really what they want to do is to gauge your professional traits. Again, at this point, they likely know that you have the actual qualifications or what we call hard skills. Hard skills are to do with your different training, your degrees, things like that. What they're wanting to gauge in an interview is what we call soft skills. These are skills like communication, teamwork, problem solving, work ethic, and your ability to be adaptable or flexible if the work environment changes. These are the type of skills that they're very interested in. And it's likely that if they find someone who is very strong in soft skills, they will probably look more favorably upon that candidate because they're likely to look at that candidate and say, you know what, I can train you to do whatever it is that I want you to do or need you to do because you have all of these soft skills that make you very trainable, very teachable. You're going to be a very strong employee here because you have these soft skills. If you are severely lacking in the soft skills, that's going to come across to an interviewer, and that could likely be why you might not get a job later on. So this is really the purpose for an interviewer to have you brought in for an interview. They want to gauge your professional traits or soft skills. Now, the purpose of an interview from your perspective as the interviewee, the purpose of your being there is for you to be able to display your skill set. Now, specifically what I mean is not to just talk about skills you have, not to say things like you're hardworking or you have, good communication skills or that you have good problem solving skills, whatever it may be. It's not the time for you to say that you have these skills. It's very much like when we were talking about the cover letter assignment. Anyone can say anything, right? You can say any of this stuff about you. You don't want to just state you have a skill set. What you want to do is talk about it in an applied way, rather than just listing out good qualities about yourself. You could talk about experiences and things like this that you've had, or things that you would like to do in the position that you're applying for that demonstrate this skill set. So you want to talk about it in a more applied way or inferred way. For example, if you're talking about a past experience, you want it to come across as you're talking about that experience as you had to have good communication skills in order to have that experience successfully. So you are displaying your skill set through examples rather than just listing out qualities that you have. And really, you want to gear the conversation whenever possible to being able to talk about what you can contribute to the institution or to the department, whatever it is that you're applying to. You want to talk about what you can do in terms of contributions, what you can offer. That's really the purpose of your being there from your perspective, is to convey how your skill set in an applied way maps onto what they're looking for and what you can contribute. More or less, you're conveying your value. Now let's chat about some qualities that interviewers might pick up on that are very favorable, things that look good, make interviewers more attracted to a candidate. I went around our psychology department and asked a variety of different faculty members what they want to see when they're interviewing a potential job candidate. And the ones that we'll talk about here are some of the responses that I got, and the ones that are starred or have an asterisk are the ones that multiple faculty members said. So the first one here we have is appearance, and I will tell you every single faculty member that I asked this question gave this as one of their answers. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with physical attractiveness. This has to do with how you present yourself in terms of your attire, if you are clean, if your attire is clean, if you look neat and tidy, basically if you're presentable. That says a lot about you as an applicant, how much effort you put in to the interview itself, the type of image that you want to portray. It just says a lot about you and your organizational skills, your responsibility, things like this. So this is something that a lot of people who are going to interview are going to want to see in a candidate, is a positive appearance. Something else, and again, notice there's a star here, communication skills. If you actually want to have conversations with people or not, and how well you can make your point. This is basically just looking at if you give thoughtful answers, if you truly listen when people speak to you, if you do a good job at expressing your point. Also body language. Body language cues are very important with communication. Certain things that you can do can show that you're invested in the conversation. Alternatively, you can do certain things via body language that communicate to somebody that you're cut off, you're not listening, or that you're uninterested. So your communication skills are a big one. Also, eye contact. Now we know that, some people feel more comfortable with this than others, but nonetheless, if someone never looks at you, it says something, right? And it usually doesn't read the best. This doesn't mean that you should stare at somebody the whole time that you're speaking to them, but you should try to have good positive eye contact. Something else was confidence, not to be confused with arrogance. Confidence in your ability to try to tackle problems that are presented to you in the interview. They are going to ask you probably a fair number of questions related to like scenarios and things like this that could happen if you were to be in that job or be in that program, and they want to see how confident you are in your answers and how confident you are in your own ability. They want to see that you have some bit of self-assuredness. Something else was knowledge of institution. So how well do you know the institution you want to go to? If you don't know the institution, then why on earth do you want to be there? Why on earth should they pick you above another applicant when you don't even understand the place of business that you would be working at or the college that you would be attending? You need to know about the place that you say you want to be. And this also speaks to this idea of fit. A lot of times a job or acceptance into a graduate program will be heavily dependent upon how well it seems that you would fit there. How well would you fit into the environment, the culture? Could you contribute in a positive way? Would you work well with the people there? And if you don't have knowledge of the institution, it's going to be really difficult to figure out if you would be a good fit. Being sincere in your answers. You can translate this into giving honest and meaningful answers. Don't BS. They can tell. It's obvious when you do this, when you're not being genuine. Be sincere in your answers. Also, exhibiting warm qualities about yourself, that you have warmth, that you're approachable, that you seem to be kind. And the last one was vulnerability. I think this one's important. I feel like, and this could be just me speaking from my own experience, but I've heard several people say that they struggle with this as well. When asked a question that you're not sure how to answer, you don't want to say you don't know, because it could read like you're undereducated or you don't have enough experience. And I think that from an applicant perspective, there's a big fear of that. You don't want to show weaknesses. But on the other hand, if you just try to act like you know everything, it shows that you're not willing to admit when you don't know, that you're not willing to admit a vulnerability, like being unsure. And that's also a negative, right? So if you aren't sure about a question you're asked in an interview, don't say you don't know, but also don't try to give a certain definitive answer. Instead, try to, admit, you know what, I'm not exactly sure, but if I were to answer, I would say this, and then do your best. It's good to acknowledge that you aren't certain, because it's likely to imply that you're willing to reach out for help, but you're also trying to answer the question. So showing a bit of vulnerability shows room for growth, and it shows a level of self-awareness, and this is something that can be favorable for a candidate. On the flip, I also asked these faculty members red flags, and the number one thing was arrogance. And again, not to be confused with confidence. Very different. Arrogance, a lot of this can be tonal, right? It just depends on your body language and also kind of repetitive instances throughout the interview. If you display several different occasions where you're arrogant, like multiple times in the same interview, they're going to think you're an arrogant person. And just to be honest, people really in general don't want to work with an arrogant person. It can create problems in a workplace. I mean, if you're a know-it-all, then you're not teachable, right? And you can talk about your skill set in a positive way without being arrogant. For example, if you're going to describe yourself as being, I'll use the example of charismatic. That's an opinion. That's an opinion you have about yourself. And if you have to tell somebody you're charismatic, then it's likely that maybe you don't exactly have that quality, right? That's not something for you to tell somebody about yourself. Rather, that's something that somebody would have an opinion about you, right? If you're charismatic, people will notice that. They'll have that opinion about you based upon how you present yourself, not the fact that you told them that you were. You obviously don't want to tell them that you're the best at this or you're the best at that. Rather, you want to talk in an educated way about your experiences, but still be very approachable. Being arrogant just doesn't read well in an interview. BS answers. So this was said in relation to when asked about, for example, if you were asked about your greatest weakness, you can give a BS answer there. Don't give a throwaway answer like, I work too hard or something like that. Like, people can read through that. Instead, try to give a more genuine answer to a question like that. And I'll talk more about maybe better ways to do that here in a little bit later in this lecture. Being dismissive. So dismissing somebody's point of view, someone's perspective, being dismissive of an idea or something that you don't find that is valuable. Being dismissive can translate into you being close-minded, and that can be difficult to work with. Being rude. This seems very obvious, but sometimes folks really don't realize when they are rude. I can tell you in particular, if you're going for an all-day interview, it's likely that you may go out to lunch with people. And I've been on several interviews like that where I've actually been the interviewee, but also I've been part of kind of the interviewer group. And something that I always pay attention to is how someone conducts themselves, especially when they think that they aren't being watched as closely, or if they think that it's time to relax a bit. I really pay attention to how they interact with people, particularly wait staff and things like that. If you're rude, people notice it, and it doesn't read well. Being unprepared. This is one that several faculty reported. Being unprepared. So this would be in relation to your knowledge about the job and things like that. your knowledge about the institution, your knowledge about what you should know about your own background. Basically just being unprepared to answer questions, unprepared to know anything about what it is you're actually applying to. If you're unprepared, then it shows you really aren't invested and you don't really care about the interview, and it makes them question why they're even interviewing you in the first place. Okay, let's talk about some common interview questions. This is one that you may or may not get, but it's probably pretty likely that you would get it, and if you do, you're likely going to get it right out the gate. Tell us about yourself. This can trip people up because it's a loaded question, right? Tell you what? What do you want to know? Do you want to know about my professional self, my personal self? I mean, what do you want to know? Well, likely they're using this as a very quick and easy way to eliminate candidates. This is more likely perhaps to be used in a business environment, but we use this in academics as well. Basically, they're looking for any easy way to kind of mark candidates off the list as possibilities for the job. And I know that can sound bad, but understand, if they're looking at 100+ applicants, rather than looking for the needle in the haystack, the one that's the right one per se, it's easier to look at the ones that aren't the right one and kind of move them out of the way so that they can focus on the ones that are a better match. So this is one easy way they can do it. What they're looking for is a more professional answer about your professional self. And that is also a very safe thing to do. And speaking of safe material, again, if you're at the interview process, you can assume that your resume or your curriculum vitae didn't get you disqualified for the job. At this point, there's nothing about you that is a red flag yet, right? They're interviewing you, so they're obviously more or less okay with your resume. So you can talk about that here because it's safe. And that brings me to the next point. You want to talk about your professional self and safe material. You want to avoid anything that's over personal or oversharing, or something that could be polarizing. And you might be surprised what's polarizing. We all know that politics is very polarizing. You don't want to talk about that, obviously. But believe it or not, even something as seemingly benign as being a sports fan of a certain team. Well, if somebody who is listening to your interview, or the person who's actually interviewing you, is a fan of the opposing team, that could be enough to kind of put a little barb in their brain that maybe you're not a good fit. And I know it seems silly, but you don't want to do anything to hurt yourself. So don't be over personal, don't overshare, and don't talk about anything polarizing. Instead, try this. Try to answer the question in under a minute. I know that can be tough, but give it a go. Quickly summarize your experience, professional experience, from early career to present. So try to figure out a way to make your experiences kind of flow together. You probably want to pick key experiences that you think are most related to the job or program you're applying to, and bring it all the way to the present, and then finish with, and that's what brings me here today and why I'm excited to talk to you about this current opportunity, right? Bringing the focus back to how everything that you've done has led you to this opportunity, this current job or program, and that's why I'm excited, and that's what I want to talk about today. Next common question: how would you see your role here? I've been asked this many times. So basically they're asking you, if we give you the job, what would you do here? You know, how would you perform the role if we were to give you the job? This is their way of trying to test out if you understand the institution and what would be possible for you to do at that institution, that role. And they also want to see if you thought about how to apply your skills in their environment, what your skills and experience can do for their current situation in that company or in that program. They want to see if you've mapped yourself onto their institution and if you can do good things there. What is your biggest weakness? This is tough and this is loaded, and I kind of touched on this already. You don't want to give a BS answer. That doesn't read well. You want to give something that is a genuine answer. And the reason why, they're checking to see if, firstly, if you're self-aware, if you're aware of where your weaknesses are. Because if you know that, it's likely that you're going to be open to improvement. You know, somebody who doesn't believe that they don't have a weakness, That can be a difficult person to work with, right? And you're obviously not going to be open to self-growth. So it demonstrates that you're self-aware and they're looking for honesty. So no BS, you want to give something that is an honest weakness that you have, but then you want to demonstrate that you also have a plan for how to deal with that weakness. So things to avoid. So weaknesses to avoid reporting. Anything that has to do with like a basic skill deficit. So these are skills that they just kind of assume you already have. Things like being able to manage multiple tasks. That's going to be something that pretty much any job you would have would require of you. They're just going to assume that you can do that. And if you say that you can't, well, you're admitting that you're lacking in a basic skill. Another one is saying you're not a people person. Oh my goodness. We can joke about that, about how we're introverts and how we don't, don't want to be around people, well, that's kind of a joke, but in an interview, the reality is you're going to have to deal with people on some level. And so basic communication skills are just assumed. They're going to assume you have that. If you say you're not a people person, that's telling them that you don't like people, you don't like to communicate, and you're likely not good at it. That's going to be a big red flag. Weakness in personality. This one's interesting. If you admit a weakness that is related to a personality trait, then what you could be telling them is that it's something that can't be fixed or changed. For example, saying you're impatient. That's considered to be more of a personality trait or something that isn't changeable, fixable. If you say you're impatient, it could communicate to them that that's just how you are. So it's a weakness that you can't improve on. So you can't have a plan on how to work on it or fix it. So these are things to maybe consider when having to answer this question. The last one is, and I've already touched on this, a BS weakness that's actually a strength. Saying you work too hard or you're a perfectionist. I'm not saying that that's not necessarily true, but that's something that translates into a strength. And people know that. They know what you're trying to do when you say that. So they're going to read through that. Instead, you want to give something that is a genuine weakness, but something that is not related to a personality trait, which implies that it's not fixable, or something that relates to a basic skill, which you should have at this point. Try safer responses to this question. Pick a skill that you lack, but you shouldn't really have yet, something that they wouldn't expect you to have. For example, something in leadership. If you've never held a leadership role, it's not really expected that you would have that trait yet, but demonstrating that you're interested in it, that you would like to achieve it, shows that you're looking ahead and that you could have a plan on how to achieve those leadership skills. Another common interview question, why should we hire you? Why are you the best candidate? I've gotten this one, I would say, every interview I've ever had. This is likely going to come toward the end of the interview. You can answer this any number of ways. And I hate to say it, but the first time I got this question, it threw me. I really didn't know how to answer it. And I think I've kind of talked to you all about this in lecture before, but I felt really badly about how I answered this question the first time I got it. I could tell you all of the ways maybe not to answer this question. Instead, I'll just tell you the best way to answer this question, in my opinion. And even for someone else, if it's not necessarily the best answer, I'll tell you what, it's never a bad answer. It's never bad to tell them you could be the best candidate for this job, or you are very well suited for this job because you want this job. I want to work with you. I want to work at your institution, or I want to go to your graduate program, and then give them a reason why. But tell them you want it. You're passionate about it if you want to say that. But demonstrate enthusiasm because you want to be there. Remember, you're in an interview. Every person in those interview spots alongside you are going to be qualified. Saying anything to do at this point about your qualifications is really kind of a moot point because you and everyone else, you're all qualified. It doesn't add to your argument, but something that could set you apart is your desire or drive or enthusiasm to be there with them in that position. So saying you want it is never a bad thing. Okay, now let's talk about some good things to do for an interview. This is more in terms of being able to prepare, but also once you get there, things to kind of bring with you or whatever to, make sure that you're going to have the best chance of putting forth a good impression. So first of all, just before you even go to an interview, see it for what it is. It's an exchange of information between two parties. You're not there to grovel and beg for a job, okay? It can feel like that, I know, but that's not what you're there to do. They're there to learn about you. You're there to learn about them, right? It's meant to be an exchange of information, right? Something you can do to help yourself is do practice interviews, like what we're going to do in this class. Do it several times. Do it with friends, family, whomever is willing to help you. But if you do it, I would recommend that you have them ask you some questions that you're prepared to answer, but then some novel questions too. Because I promise in any interview you have, they will throw you a curveball. And they could do this for a variety of reasons. It might just be because they are interested in you and they really do want to know the answer to the question, or it could be that you said something earlier they were interested in and they want to know more about that, and you didn't really see that question coming, but they ask it because they want to know your answer. Or they could be asking you purely to see how you handle an odd question, okay? What they're looking for if they do that is, can you think on your feet? And can you give a genuine answer when you're not prepared? Basically, how well do you handle when things go a little bit off script, right? And the answer should be pretty well, right? So the idea is that, yeah, you're going to be asked questions you may not have a prepared answer for, but if you've been asked different and novel questions enough times, then you're likely going to be used to that. So you're going to be more ready to answer something when you aren't prepared because you've had to do it before. Also be prepared for what are called behavioral questions. So this is when they're asking you to use some experience you've had before and how it helps you be more prepared to do something in the future or something like that. So they're asking something related to your own behavior or your own experience. These are really important questions. They want to see if you can map on your own personal background in a way that allows you to be better prepared or to have a plan for the future. They want to see if you can use experience in a positive way. Obviously, look the part. This is that appearance thing, right? Always try to look the part, and if when in doubt, I would say dress up rather than dress down. You always want to look the part that you're trying to get, the job that you're trying to get, what you're trying to portray. Look the part. That way they don't have to envision you in the part. You already are there and you already look the part. And again, this doesn't have anything to do with being fancy, wearing expensive stuff. This has to do with you being tidy and put together and looking like you could fit right into that role right away. Be on time, which really translates into being early. Being on time is actually being late. You want to be there a few minutes early, ready and completely prepared to go. Bring a notebook. You could argue that maybe a device or something is okay, but I would argue bring a notebook to an interview, because a device, they might assume that you're taking notes, but you maybe aren't taking notes. You could be on something else, doing something else. They don't know that. So I would bring a notebook and actually write down some things that they tell you. It will look like you're paying attention because you are paying attention. And then you can obviously reflect back later on your notes because you took notes. It's just a good look. Bring a notebook. And ask questions. Specifically ask questions about what opportunities will be afforded to you there. What could you do for personal growth and development? Are there opportunities for you to advance in that company or in that program? These are questions that show that you are already trying to envision yourself there as a part of their environment. And that is a positive thing. If you don't have questions, it could demonstrate to them that you don't care. So ask questions. And last, send a thank you afterward, but just make it a thank you and leave it at that. Right after you have the interview, send them a thank you. Don't wait a week. That looks a little strange. But do it within a day, I would say, and just say, thank you very much for your time. I look forward to any correspondence in the future, and then drop it. Leave it there. Don't try to continue the interview afterward. That's a little bit iffy. Just say thank you. It shows manners, and that's never a bad thing. Now, this is fun. Some things to avoid saying or discussing in an interview. So this is a little bit different than when I polled our faculty here in the psychology department. This is more widespread, different sources that I've looked through. And these are common ones that people say just don't read well. The first one would be asking the question, what would I do in this role? Now, you may have that question, and I'm sure you do. But for an interviewer, that could look like you didn't read the job ad. That could just look like you didn't even bother to take the time to look into the job description at all. Instead, maybe try something like, what would a week in this role look like for me? That gives you more detail, probably more of what you really want to know, and it doesn't read the same as, I don't know what this role is. Saying something like, I can handle any situation. That is a nope. That's a big nope. You aren't superhuman. You can't handle everything. You can't, at least not on your own. But when you say something like this, it implies that you think you can. And that's kind of a red flag to an employer, because we know that that's not realistic. Instead, it shows that you may not be self-aware. You may not realize when you need to ask for help. And that's always a bad thing, because that's going to put you in a bigger position to make a mistake. And it also limits your ability for self-growth, because you don't think you need to. Okay? Don't say, I can handle any situation. Statements like that, they're a big nope. Asking about money. Of course, we all want to know about money. We're not working for free. But I promise you, they'll get there. They will discuss it when they're ready. Most likely when they're making an offer to you. That's when you will find out definitive information about salary. But you're likely not to find out until then. If you want to know, kind of an idea, you could look on resources like Glassdoor or something like that. You can kind of check what the general range is for someone in that role. You could even look into, sometimes in Glassdoor, they'll even tell you, in that role, in that company, this is kind of more or less what you could expect. You can do some looking online to have an idea of what it should be, but you don't want to ask in an interview, so what are you going to pay me? You don't want to ask about that. It just doesn't read well. They'll talk about money when they're ready, and that's likely when they're offering the job to you. And at that point, they're bringing up money, so now you can discuss it. Now you can go back and forth about what you want and what you think is acceptable if you were to take the role. But don't mention it until they do. Y'all, this seems so obvious, but it isn't. You would be surprised how many people are more than willing to tell you all kinds of bad stuff about previous jobs they've had, previous bosses they've had, previous colleagues or coworkers they've had, and they'll do this in an interview. This, I promise you all, never reflects positively on you, because immediately what they're thinking, if you're willing to do this in an interview and slam another job or slam another boss or slam other coworkers, how long is it going to be before you're here and you're doing the same about us? Even if you have a legitimate reason to feel this way, this is not something you ever want to vocalize. And if you have to answer a question regarding why you left a previous job, come up with something else. Come up with something else. Don't lie, but come up with another reason, a legitimate reason. And it could just be, you know what, I left that job because it didn't match up with my current career goals or my future career goals or something like that. That's a much better answer than, I worked with a jerk. You don't want to do that. That doesn't reflect positively upon you. Find other reasons that you left. Being arrogant. I mentioned this earlier. This was one that was mentioned by multiple AUM psychology faculty, and it's also mentioned widely in other sources as well. And again, this can be tonal. This can be in your affect, but this could also be in your statements. It just depends. But in general, if you're interviewing, don't speak as though you're doing them a favor, like you would be doing them a favor to work with them or doing a task for them. Or in I can do, da. The more I's you say in a statement, the more it can start to reflect as an arrogance. Be careful here. Instead, what you can try to do is try saying we instead of I. If you're talking about future tense and you're thinking about working at a particular institution or with a program or whatever you are going to do, talk about things as a team. Well, we could do this. It does a few things. It shows that you're humble, that you're not an I person all the time. It also shows that you're already picturing yourself as part of their team. Okay? It reads much better than being arrogant. Being desperate. We all feel this. We all need a job. We all got to pay the bills. But they don't want to hear it and they don't need to know about it. Okay? Even if it's true. Instead, translate that into being enthusiastic. I am so excited to interview with you today. I've heard about, whatever, or I read about this, and I'm so excited to learn more about this opportunity. Translate the desperation into enthusiasm. That will read a lot more positively than just being desperate, okay? Saying that somebody recommended you. Now, this might not seem like an obvious one, but I promise you a few things. Firstly, they likely know this. If somebody recommended you, they have their recommendation letter, or they spoke to that person. They know you got recommended. They already know that. You highlighting that could translate into arrogance. It could translate into you just think you have the job already because you got that recommendation, or that you think that that the interview is just a formality, that it doesn't matter, and that you're not going to try because you think you have that job already. And that doesn't read well. So don't mention a recommendation from somebody because they know about it already. Saying that you've never used a product or you know nothing about the company. So this applies really to any field, but basically just admitting that you know nothing about them or nothing about what they do. That's going to immediately make them question, then why on earth do you want to be here? If you know nothing about us, nothing about what we sell or what we promote or whatever it is, then why would you want to be here? And why would you openly admit that in an interview, right? It just says something. Kind of related, talking about a competitor. So this could be done in a few different ways. Confusing a product the competitor makes with a product that the company you're interviewing with makes. So for example, if you were to walk into Taco Bell and say that you liked an item that wasn't on their menu, it was on a competitor's menu, oops, that's a problem. Talking about a competitor, and that also kind of is related to the previous point of you don't really know what they do. You don't really know about their products if you do something like that. So that's not going to read well. But also you can talk about a competitor and kind of compare the company you're interviewing with or the program that you're interviewing with another company or another program. This can read as being unfair or unflattering. There's no need to discuss a competitor. You don't need to do that. You want to talk about the place that you're interviewing with right now. That's what you want to talk about. The last one, and I think this could be the most relevant for you right now, blaming your performance or your answers to interview questions on your nerves. Folks, sorry to tell you, this is not going to reflect well. And it's not that nervousness is kind of a black mark against you. It isn't. And I'll tell you why here in a minute. But in the immediacy, if you say, oh, I don't know if that answer was okay, I'm nervous. If you say that, especially if you say it multiple times, they're going to start to question whether or not your answer was genuine, or if it was really a good answer. Maybe they thought your answer was a good one, but it could change their perception of your performance because you're basically telling them that you're not doing a good job. Okay? So don't blame your performance on nerves. And that's really because everyone is nervous. Everyone that interviews or that is being observed, whatever it is, if you're having to perform in front of people, you're going to be nervous. Everyone is. Everyone is. It's normal and they expect it. And that's why most of the time people say when you're interviewing, we're not really all that off put by nerves because we know you're nervous. That's not going to be what makes or breaks you. Okay? Everyone is going to be nervous. It is okay to be nervous. What they want to see is if you can perform through the nervousness, if you can answer questions and be personable and do all the things despite being nervous. So what I would tell you, instead of focusing on trying not to be nervous or telling yourself you're being silly for being nervous, trying to change it, just accept it. Accept it as normal. It is normal and it's okay. It's fine to be nervous. And then learn how to deal with that. Learn how to perform even though you are nervous. And as you do that, it will get easier with each following experience. The more you do it, the more you will get used to that feeling of nervousness, but you will know that you know how to perform through it. Okay, so let's recap. First of all, see the interview for what it is, that exchange of information. Do your homework about the company or the program that you're looking into. Practice your interview skills with anybody who is kind enough to listen to you. Be put together. Show up on time, which really means early, and pay attention to your appearance. Avoid showing any kind of disinterest or boredom. arrogance, or lack of self-awareness. These things do not read well in an interview. Show enthusiasm, not desperation, but show enthusiasm and excitement. This will never be off-putting, I promise you. No one is ever going to look at a candidate and go, you know what, you're too happy to be here. And finally, thank you all so much. You've been so fun. I've had a good time with you all this semester. And remember, though, I don't disappear after this class ends, okay? Just because we're done with class and assignments and all that doesn't mean that I just poof into thin air. I'm here to help you. If you in the future ever want me to just look at a resume or a cover letter, or if you just need some advice or some help, I'm here, okay? So, in the future, shoot me an email or something if you need some help. I'm more than willing to help you. All right, that's all for now.